Sarah Ann Saran Fox, and this is Dan and Saran Take on Hollywood.
Tonight, we are going to be discussing the Academy Awards. Surprise, surprise. However, we're planning on looking at the Academy Awards from a slightly different perspective. That's both historic and scandalous and fun.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, let's talk about the real history of the Academy Awards. Saran, do you happen to know any of the stories about how the Academy started?
Well, the Academy started as the movie business was really coming into its own. It was around the time of sound pictures, and it was actually just a big dinner party at the Hollywood Roosevelt, I believe, where people just came in their best clothes, and the awards were it was no big deal, and it was very, very in Hollywood. It was just very insular. It was not for the public. There was a newspaper article written about it, but it certainly wasn't on radio. There was no television at the time, and it was just a way of Hollywood rewarding that which they felt was the best at the time, and also it was good for business.
You are absolutely correct. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about the Academy Awards is from the very beginning, it was known as being a promotional event for Hollywood. It was such a promotional event for Hollywood, in fact, that in 1948, when Laurence Olivier won for Best Picture for Hamlet and Best Actor, there was a emergency meeting at the Academy wondering if they should disallow movies that were not shot in the United States.
Mm-hmm. They were just absolutely petrified that the public might rise up and dishonor the Oscars or dishonor. They felt that maybe Hollywood was being dishonored because of this foreign influence. And quite the opposite has proven to be true. Some of the greatest performances have been given by foreign actors like Colin Firth in The King's Speech, and as you mentioned, Laurence Olivier in Hamlet. So the Oscars actually have been very democratic in welcoming outside of the United States actors, performers, and creators. And then, of course, they created, do you know, Dan, what year they created the best foreign language film?
I do not know for sure, but I have a feeling it was after World War II, and I believe it was around 1948.
Yeah.
I do know that 1961, in particular, marked a milestone when Sophia Loren won Best Actress for Two Women.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's a magnificent performance. Absolutely. This sex symbol who was, very beautiful, very voluptuous, had been in a lot of comedies, had risen from the poor part of Italy, didn't have a father figure, etc. Married Carlo Ponti, who was a producer many years older than her, turned into a performance of a woman and her daughter during the ravaging times of World War II in Italy, who go through many, many experiences, including being raped. Mm-hmm. And the Oscar, it was a shock and a surprise to people that this beautiful, sexy woman could really, really act. And she got the Oscar, deservedly so.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the very, very beginning of the Academy Awards, the first film that won an Oscar for Best Picture was Wings.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at Wings today, in this age when we are so inundated with CGI,
mm-hmm.
it's hard to believe that a lot of those aerial stunts were actually real. The director of the film was William Wellman, who was known as Wild Man Wellman.
Right.
Because of his own experience in World War I as a fighter pilot.
And because it was the time when airplanes were coming into their own, the airline industry was starting to grow, and you had a plethora of stunt performers mm-hmm. who could go out. My father-in-law, Benny Fox, the human fly, used to go out and perform on acrobatics on airplane wings. So they must have been able to enroll and hire a number of stunt people from the barnstormers who went around the country doing these kinds of stunts.
In fact, the movie The Great Waldo Pepper from 1974 is about that particular era.
With Robert Redford, uh-huh.
Now, I'm going to ask you
mm-hmm.
a very, very leading question.
Okay.
What Academy Award winners do you feel did not deserve to win Best Picture?
Oh, 1952, The Greatest Show on Earth, Cecil B. DeMille, just basically a soap opera under the big tent, a very contrived, manipulative spectacle. It had some wonderful scenes of the circus, and if you watch it as a child, it's absolutely awesome with all these grown-ups and Jimmy Stewart playing the sad clown with the big secret, Gloria Grahame with too much lipstick on that upper lip, and who else was in that? Charlton
Edmund
Heston,
O'Brien,
Edmund
Charlton
O'Brien,
Heston,
yes.
Betty Hutton,
Betty Hutton,
Cornell Wilde.
Cornell Wilde. And so in one sense, if you take it apart scene by scene, there are certain wonderful circus elements and a lot of wonderful tension. But Best Picture, and it won over High Noon. Now, Dan, you have a story about why you believe Greatest Show on Earth won over High Noon, which is a much better picture.
Well, allegedly, the reason why High Noon was shut out is that High Noon was coming out right in the middle of the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And it was perceived that High Noon was in support of the alleged communists in Hollywood. And it was considered it was considered a very pro-red movie. So the Academy was already afraid. They were already very white-knuckled. So they weren't about to give this controversial film a Best Picture. In fact, one of the interesting things about the Academy Awards and why I asked this question is that one of the easiest ways to understand why certain movies win Academy Awards and others don't is because Hollywood, for all intents and purposes, is a very petty town. And a lot of times movies are denied awards because a performer or a director or even a writer is considered to have gotten too big for their britches. And so they need to be quote unquote punished. Think of how such luminaries as Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg went years, decades before they actually were awarded something. And normally, and this might be a little controversial topic, a lot of times the movie they won for was not one of their stronger works.
And that brings us to the subject of Elizabeth Taylor, who is probably, and is our greatest female movie star. I will give you that. We have an ongoing argument about Greta Garbo and Elizabeth Taylor, but we'll get to that another time. She was excellent in Suddenly Last Summer, which came out in 1959. It's the Tennessee Williams play. It deals with cannibalism and incest, among other light topics. She was passed over because of the scandal when she stole Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds. And everybody was up in arms about that. 2 years later, she gets pneumonia, is in Rome making Cleopatra, gets a tracheotomy, and makes an inferior film to Suddenly Last Summer called Butterfield 8. And she gets the award because Hollywood loves the drama, and they rewarded her because she almost died. So here you go, Liz. We forgive you. And on top of that, here's your Oscar for a film in which you gave a lesser performance than Suddenly Last Summer. So with the Oscars, sometimes it's all about timing.
The other thing that was amazing about Elizabeth Taylor at that period was that Butterfield 8 was a perfect example of what makes somebody a star. And that is you put them in a downright lousy movie and the movie becomes great just because of them. Now, Liz Taylor had done this with many other films, but she'd also proven herself to have a lot more chops as an actress that people gave her credit for. Prior to Suddenly Last Summer, she gave a great performance in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And then prior to that, she had been nominated for an Academy Award for Raintree County. And
also, It's a Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift. That scene where she says to him, "Come to mama, come to mama." That alone was worth an Academy Award. She played that role absolutely perfectly. She was just the right amount of lovely, rich young woman who didn't have a snobby bone in her body when she fell in love with George, played by Montgomery Clift. They were also best friends in real life, and she was the person who saved his life when he smashed into a tree on Benedict Canyon after a party at her house back in the mid-50s. And she pulled his teeth. He was choking on his own teeth, and she reached in. She was a gutsy woman and pulled his teeth out of his mouth and saved his life. And tell the story about what she said about Montgomery Clift, taking him everywhere, making sure he was invited everywhere.
Well, Montgomery Clift was considered a problem because just like a lot of the great stars, Judy Garland among them, Marilyn Monroe, Montgomery Clift was a very self-destructive personality. And he had based a lot of his self-esteem not only on his acting ability, but on his looks. And here he was devastated in his looks. And he was on medication to the point where he became extremely addicted, and that made him look worse. And people in Hollywood have a very bad habit of not helping people when they're down. In fact, enjoying kicking them even harder. So here we had Montgomery Clift, who was at his nadir and Elizabeth Taylor almost single-handedly resurrected his career. So she has a lot of credit for the way she behaved toward people when she really didn't have to. Now, going back to 1960, who do you think should have won that year?
Refresh my memory.
Well, okay, I don't remember all the nominees, but the one that I think in particular.
But who won?
It was Elizabeth
It
Taylor.
was Elizabeth Taylor.
But the person that I think, if Elizabeth Taylor had not had the added benefit of surviving pneumonia,
Right.
I think it should have been Shirley MacLaine for her performance in The Apartment.
She was amazing. She was absolutely amazing.
For Shirley MacLaine, I think that there was some resentment toward Elizabeth Taylor for a number of years because of that. And it kind of all smoothed out when they were in Those Old Broads together, a TV movie.
Right.
But there was a sense that there was a rivalry between them because they were very different female types.
I also think that Hollywood values loyalty to Hollywood, and they were also honoring Elizabeth Taylor's career, capped by this. She went up there beautiful with this gorgeous gown, and she may have even been a little tan, and she had this sexy scar on her neck, the tracheotomy scar. And you know, it was like a movie in itself. And I think that one of the other reasons why Greatest Show on Earth won an Oscar is because it was difficult to make. So they're honoring all the hard work that DeMille did as the director, because it's not easy to shoot a circus film and to make it look real. And it had a lot of reality in it, but it's not a good movie.
No. There's another movie that won Best Picture that I really dislike, and that is An American in Paris. And if you look at 1951 and you look at what the competition for An American in Paris was, that really stands out in stark contrast.
Was Singing in the Rain nominated?
Singing in the Rain was not nominated.
Oh my God, that should have won.
That was 1952.
That was a year later. Okay.
And that was the year of High Noon.
Right.
And 1951, the competition included A Place in the Sun.
Oh gosh.
And Streetcar Named Desire.
And American, do you think maybe the vote was split?
The vote might have been split.
The vote might have been split, yeah.
But if you want to look at genres that are notorious, the musical genre is the most infamous in terms of almost every single musical that won Best Picture is one that fans of musicals tend to not think were that good. Maybe with the exception of Sound of Music.
Well, my opinion of I won't go into my opinion of Sound of Music. I think it's kitsch. I think it's whatever. It didn't deserve an Oscar, but I think the one musical that did deserve an Oscar, because I think it was brilliantly made by Rob Marshall, which was Chicago. What's your opinion of Chicago?
My opinion of Chicago is that in the grand scheme of musicals that have won Best Picture, it's one of the better ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly not an unthinkable disaster like Oliver or Broadway Melody,
mm-hmm.
or some of the others that have taken the Best Picture Oscar. My personal worst musical Best Picture is American in Paris.
Tell us why. Why? Tell me why.
I find American in Paris to be a deeply misogynist and kind of nasty film. It's about people using other people in a very extreme sense. You have Gene Kelly selling himself to the highest bidder in the form of Nina Foch. And yet he's in love with this gamin played by Leslie Caron,
mm-hmm.
who owes George Guattari a debt of gratitude because he saved her life. And George Guattari is Gene Kelly's best friend. So what does Gene Kelly do? He immediately goes after his best friend's girlfriend. And his behavior in it is continually very low. And yet, because he's the hero, we're supposed to love him. Now, maybe that was Vincente Minnelli as a director trying to bring a little bit of darkness to the musical, but it's not overt enough. So, and
in between all of this is this incredible dancing.
Yes.
And so I don't have quite the memory for it that you do. I'm thinking, I wish that Singing in the Rain had been awarded an Oscar somehow, even if they had like a best musical category, mm-hmm. because when you watch that film today, 60 years later, it's not dated. It's still relevant. And even if it does seem like an older movie, it's still entertaining and funny. and incredible to watch the dancing, and also that sequence he has with Sid Charisse is so
Broadway melody.
Broadway is so
Broadway
sexy.
rhythm.
Broadway, and Donald O'Connor, make them laugh.
Mhm.
I could watch that over and over and over again. And that to me is, with, Oscars notwithstanding, is if you can watch a film over and over again and still get something out of it and still enjoy it, that is the mark of a great film for me. However it resonates, whether it's entertainment with Singing in the Rain or something that moves you very, very deeply, like something like Two Women, makes you think, affects you, or like American Hustle, which won several Oscars, or at least one Oscar. That's a film that when it's on cable on TV, I will watch several scenes of it. I find it absolutely irresistible.
My concern with Singing in the Rain is that even though I love it, I think it's a great movie, but I also find it to be another one of these movies that has a dark side. And the dark side in it is that the Lena Lamont character is actually a tragic character. She's sort of like Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard.
I knew you were going to say. I knew you, because the minute you started, having your own take on it, I said he's going to see that. He's going to say they didn't treat Lena Lamont very fairly, because she had her limitations, and they could have handled her differently. They not only made her someone who had a very high speaking voice, they made her nasty.
She should have been nasty, because she, when she says to the producer, the owner of the studio at the end, "I made this studio," she's absolutely right. And at the beginning, we're told that she's snobby and unpleasant because she didn't treat the Gene Kelly character when he was still a stuntman well. And I'm thinking, well, of course she's not going to treat him well, because she sees this stuntman who's making a pass at her, and she's thinking he wants to sleep his way to the top. And it's not as if the film doesn't delve into that area too, because what is the scheme to destroy Lena Lamont's career?
They make a fool out of her in front of hundreds of people.
They make a fool of her in front of hundreds of people so that a girl who jumps out of a cake, in other words, a prostitute, can get a leading role from the guy she's sleeping with.
You know what I love about you is that you can take a perfectly sweet and enjoyable film and see the dark side in it. I mean, I have to say, I learn something new every day that I have a conversation with you. I've never thought of it that way. Now, and next time I Singing in the Rain, oh my God, I'm going to have such sympathy for Jean Hagen, who plays Lena Lamont, and she was awesome. She went on, by the way, to play Danny Thomas's wife in the first few years of Make Room for Daddy, and she was awesome in this film.
Did you ever see her in Adam's Rib?
Yes.
Adam's Rib.
With Tom Ewell as the husband? Yes.
That's a movie that I think should have been nominated for Best Picture, because it predated feminism and equality, and yet it dealt with that in a very, very balanced way, where you had a husband and wife team, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, battling each other in the courtroom in a battle of ideas, values, and also sex. And the things that got away with around the production code at that time are really, really stunning.
And they stayed married. She didn't leave him because he was a bit of a sexist, because it was hard for him to accept the idea of women being an equal. That they're throughout their career, Tracy and Hepburn, their sparring was of two equals, and they didn't break up over these things. And my favorite Tracy Hepburn movie is Pat and Mike. She's not much, but what's there is church. That's Garson Kanin and Ruth Gordon.
Here's another movie that they were in together that has an element of controversy that almost ties into this year's Academy Awards. And that is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was the last film they made together. Now, seen today, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner suffers from a lot of criticism, that it's very twee, it's very soft-pedaled. But if you look at the world of 1967, which is before the Civil Rights Act passed, it was way ahead of its time.
Actually, it was a few years after. 65 was it was 2 years after.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's interesting about that year is that Sidney Poitier had the bellwether year of almost any actor's
In the Heat
career.
of the Night, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
To Sir with Love.
To Sir with Love.
Not
Amazing.
a nomination for him. Now, maybe the reason he didn't get a nomination was that it was split between those three films.
It could have been, and I don't think it was racism either.
Oh, I don't think it was racism, but it's just historically sad that you have an
Yeah.
actor having such a fantastic year
Yeah.
and then not getting recognized.
And then he wins an Oscar in '63 for a much lesser film, Lilies of the Field, a sentimental romp with nuns.
Actually, you know what? Lilies of the Field is one of those old movies that I think could be very successfully remade today, because it's simple and it's heartwarming. The problem with it is that it has that element of Sidney Poitier being the quote unquote
I know what
magnificent black man.
Yeah, the magnificent black man who's going to teach the nuns how to relax and how to I stand up, I sit down, that sort of thing. He was like kind of like their savior in a way, and he showed them a different way of being. And but we've all had those experiences where someone comes into our life and teaches us something or lightens up. And it's a very entertaining movie. But I think you're right. He could have won an Oscar for any one of those three films in '67. And I think it's interesting that Steiger won it, because I think he had the harder role.
It's just like Tom Cruise in Rain Man.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Tom Cruise deserved a nomination and an Oscar, because while Hoffman was good, he was amazing, he did not have the challenging role. He didn't change. He had to take on behavior. He had to learn how to act like Raymond. And Raymond doesn't change. In the very end, there's a slight change at the train station, but Tom Cruise starts off as a self-involved, narcissistic, greedy young man, just trying to make a buck, trying to get his inheritance so his business can succeed. He's not very nice to his girlfriend, who adores him, and then he discovers he changes. I think the character who changes has for the actor, that's a much more difficult role. It was, I don't want to say it was easy for Hoffman, but it was easier. It was the showier role. And I believe Tom Cruise is a highly underrated actor. I mean, look at Jerry Maguire. I think he deserved an Oscar for that.
I would agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Cruise is an example of what makes a movie star.
Mm-hmm.
It's someone who can open a bad movie strictly on their own charisma and make it great. Just like Liz in Butterfield 8.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to bad movies that have won Best Picture, there's two from the 30s. I'm sorry I'm going back so far, but there's two from the 30s that were back to back that I just find unbearable. 1936, the Best Picture was Great Ziegfeld. 1937, the Best Picture was Good Earth. These are two movies that I find to be particularly onerous today. And it's ironic because Best Actress on both of those years was Louise Rayner. And I have to say that in retrospect, we can see why her career disappeared soon after. Rumor has it it's because she refused to sleep with Mayer, and he says, I will ruin your career. Whatever. And the fact her career did go away. But when I look at Great Ziegfeld, we have a 3-hour endless musical with good production numbers and just the worst style of MGM whitewash, non-dramatic biopic.
You know what they were really good at was just taking the sordid truth and turning it into a cream puff of a fairy tale. And one of the picture that won in '42, which was Yankee Doodle Dandy at the height when we had just come into the war.
Yes.
So that's one of the reasons why it won, because it was about patriotism, love of country, and that was what George M. Cohan embodied. That also, took a lot of liberties with the facts of his life. But when you watch it, there's that scene in the middle where he plays little Johnny Jones on the stage, and to watch him move and watch him dance. When it's on, I will tune in just to see that, because of his energy, of Cagney's charisma as a movie star, an actor, and a performer. Because when he dances, he has a very specific style. He does not move his upper body at all, and he's got this up and down, higgledy-piggledy, but very controlled style. And he took so much pleasure as an actor in that role that he won the Oscar for that, didn't he? Yes, and I think he deserved it. He is absolutely in the top 5 of my favorite actors. His energy and his sense of, I could explode and punch you in the face at any minute. That's what a lot of the great ones have.
What I also found great about Cagney is look at him in something like Footlight Parade and in Yankee Doodle Dandy, and you would assume he is a light musical comedy star who happened to just have that other side.
Then you see White Heat.
Then you see White Heat or Public Enemy or Roaring Twenties.
Absolutely amazing.
And he's the worst villain. And yet
compelling. He's compelling. it's you can't hate him. You understand him in that scene. Is it Public Enemy where at the very end they deliver him dying to his mother's house when he falls?
Yes.
Is that Public
That's
Enemy
Public
to
Enemy.
see the rise and fall? What an amazing scene that was. I mean, look at how dark that scene was. To take someone's son to the house and have the mother open the door and he falls in. It's absolutely amazing.
How about that scene at the end of the Roaring Twenties when he gets shot on the steps of the church?
Yes.
And Gladys George says, when asked, who was he? She goes, he used to be a big shot. It's just a great moment.
Some of those films had such a hard edge. And Bogart started off, before he was Bogey, when he was still coming off the stage, before he did Petrified Forest, where he played Duke, what's his last?
Duke Mantee.
Duke Mantee. He was like an ingenue too. He played a lot of ingenue roles. It's very interesting when you see some of these classic charismatic, movie stars, and to see them at the beginning like Gable, when he first started, before he kind of grew into himself, he was a bit of a lightweight. They find the gravitas as they go along, a lot of them. I think Cagney's an exception. That I don't know what his first movie was. It may have been Public Enemy. He just burst off the screen. Absolutely.
Very, very much so. Very much so. Going back to The Good Earth, which is of the movies that won Best Picture, my personal take is that's my least favorite. And maybe it's because I'm Asian.
Well, yeah. Is it because they cast the Caucasian? It's all Caucasians playing Chinese.
You know what? This might get my name painted in red as far as the Asian community is concerned, but I don't mind in an older movie having an Asian part played by a Caucasian if they showed the part a certain amount of reverence. For example, Warren Owen or Sidney Tolar, who played Charlie Chan, I thought were magnificent. It's historically a little bit disturbing that the real Asians in those movies played the smaller roles, right, like number one or number two son. But the fact that Warner Owen would learn how to speak Chinese in order to give a speech in Chinese, which is a tonal language, almost impossible for someone on the outside to learn. And even though it's not accurate, it's close enough. It was a sign of respect that he had for the role. And
I'm liking the fact that as an Asian, Asian American, you're respecting that. But let me ask you a question historically. Why didn't they cast, were there not enough Asian actors? Were they afraid people wouldn't come to see Asians in lead roles? What do you know about that?
I think it was just an old tradition. It even in the silent era, it extended to African-American characters, that they would be played by white people in blackface.
Do you think it was a little bit of racism, like a separation of races, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
because today, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when the Joy Luck Club was made, it was assumed and it was done that they cast all Asian actors, and they weren't a lot of stars, but they shined in their roles. So it was a different time, wasn't it?
It was a different time, and there were certain times when it would work. The Charlie Chan movies, maybe because they were hard genre, were fine. But if you look at the meaningful films like Good Earth or Dragon Seed, or
with
some
Katharine
of those,
Hepburn as an Asian, it was so ridiculous.
Yes,
it was so ridiculous. Yeah, I know, and yet they did it with a straight face. In other words, they said, "Well, this is okay. We'll just, make slits in the eyes." Now, as a Jewish person, I have no problem with a non-Jew playing a Jew, even though there's a, quote, Jewish look. I'm always looking for an authentic performance, an authentic attitude. And I think that the Jew that plays the best Jew, obviously, is Woody Allen, with all the neuroses that are ascribed to my people, the creativity and the neurosis. He's like the ultimate Jew, and I'm not surprised that he casts himself in most of his films as that neurotic, anxious Jewish man in love with the Shiksa, with Diane Keaton, or the 16-year-old girl. What's your take on? I watched Manhattan again the other day. What's your take on it? A lot of people are skeeved by the whole Mariel Hemingway thing.
Okay.
And if anyone doesn't know, Manhattan is a film where his girlfriend is Mariel Hemingway, who he's like a man in his 40s, and she's or he's 40 and she's 16 or 7. She's 17, right? She's 17. And they have this relationship. He's sleeping with her. And that's like statutory rape. I mean, legally.
I think here's an example of something that because we know the history of he and his not even stepdaughter ending up having a relationship, that makes it creepy.
Yeah.
In terms of the narrative of Manhattan for the time, it was absolutely appropriate, because if you think about Hollywood and having these almost Lolita-like stories, it might have been a couple of years difference, but what's the real difference between these almost granddaughter romances, like especially with Audrey Hepburn in the 50s?
Gary Cooper and Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, yes.
And Clark Gable, not Clark Gable, and Cary Grant and Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, in Sabrina, yeah.
She was always paired with these men, Fred Astaire, who were so much older than her. Funny face.
Funny face, that's right.
But it's one of those things where, yeah, Marilyn Hemingway's very young, but in terms of the age gap, that age gap is the same age gap. Yeah, statutory rape.
At the time, and at the time when it came out, it was original. It was interesting. It didn't seem skeevy because things hadn't been revealed about him and Sun Yi.
Yes.
And it just seemed, and he also had difficulty with it. He expressed his doubts about it and how he felt, but how drawn to her he was. And then also he starts a parallel romance with someone closer to his age, with Diane Keaton.
Yes.
Who I believe has been having an affair with his close friend. So it's interesting that so much of film, when we take a look at it and talk about it, is about context and the time in which things are placed, like in Gone with the Wind, or any movie where there are slaves, or even talking, about, well, George Washington had slaves, we have to downgrade his reputation. No, you have to look at a time that this was a time when people had slaves, and at that time, blacks were considered inferior by most people. So much has changed. So when we take today and we try to impose it on yesterday, you lose appreciation of history and art.
Well, take a look at the same time. Even we like to have a rose-colored view of the past. And one of the great heroines of the HUAC era was Lillian Hellman. But look at how Lillian Hellman was in terms of her portrayal of African Americans in Little Foxes. Far worse than anything in Gone with the Wind. It's downright embarrassing. It's one of the most embarrassing depictions of the African American characters in a post-Civil War era, all the way until Song of the South.
It's interesting you bring up Hellman, because it has come to light in recent years that she made up most of Julia.
Yes.
And that Mary McCarthy was right about her. She's a liar.
Yeah.
Mary McCarthy said every word she's ever written is a lie, including the word "the." Do you remember that?
Yes.
I think they were on the Susskind show or something. And she was a brilliant, and at the same time, I can still read what she's written because she was a brilliant writer, and I absolutely loved her essays. What she did, I believe, maybe this is that Lillian Hellman was a woman in denial because she was involved with a man I believe she loved more than he loved her.
Dashiell Hammett?
Yeah. Yeah. And that she desperately wanted them to stay together and be together, and that he had his limits. And what she did was she had to make things up, I think. And it's too bad, because Little Foxes is an incredible play and an incredible movie. Betty Davis and Herbert Marshall. It's a great drama. It's a great drama, in spite of the treatment of blacks in it.
Who are some of the people that you feel were robbed of Academy Awards?
Oh, my goodness. That's a challenging one. Why don't you start and I'll start thinking?
A big one for me, and I know this is a very common one, is 1954, when Grace Kelly won for The Country Girl against Judy Garland in Star is Born.
I totally agree. Judy Garland gave a great performance. We had the trajectory of a character from a very kind of innocent, unaware of her great talent young woman. That scene in the nightclub after she saves James Mason's rear end when he's drunk at that charity event, and then he goes to the ambassador and doesn't want to sleep with that girl from Pasadena, remember? And he goes and finds her singing in a club with the group, and she sings "The Man That Got Away," and then he says to her, "You're great." And she says, no, me? No, I'm not great. And she says, well, what do you know? How do you know that? I'm paraphrasing. And he says, you don't have to know about great racing horses to know a great racehorse. You don't have to know about ballet to know a great ballerina, or the same with bullfighting. You don't have to know anything about that to know greatness. And I see greatness in you. So she allows him to start to mold her. And he does it in a very Svengali-like way. He really loves her and sees her talent. I mean, he really is in service to her, or wants to be, through the whole thing, and gets her parts. And as his star falls, hers rises. And then she has to play the dutiful wife and the forgiving wife, and then she has that scene in the dressing room with what's his name?
Charles Bickford.
Yeah, Charles Bickford is the head of the studio. Where she gets a little hysterical. I don't know how to help him. It's so powerful and moving. So her range as an actress was shown throughout this. Grace Kelly was good. She played a role where she basically was the put upon wife of the alcoholic star, who's drawn to the writer. I know, and I can answer your question now. And this is like, I hate even saying this. In 1995, I think it was, or 96, 95, Nicolas Cage won for Leaving Las Vegas. And he was amazing. But I think this, to me, is the greatest robbery. And I wish there could have been two, is Sean Penn was robbed for Dead Man Walking. I think it's one of the greatest performances ever on screen, because he portrayed a murderer, someone who didn't set out to murder, but went along with the evil of murder. And I have to say that film presented the issue of the death penalty in a very even-handed way. It was not a political tract made by two people, Sarandon and Tim Robbins, who are extremely political. I believe they made a great movie that stated both sides. And I think Sean Penn was robbed. If you see that again, his changes, everything he goes through, I think he was robbed of an Oscar. But I don't think it was given unfairly to Nicolas Cage. I think it was a little easier. I hate to say this because I have such respect for actors, but I think Penn had the more challenging role, because he somehow had to convey, he had to bring out in the audience some essence of understanding and sympathy when he had done this horrible and allowed this horrible thing to happen. What you have any others that you can think of?
Those are kind of big ones for me. The Judy Garland one is huge, because that was that movie has taken on such a mantle. Unfortunately, it only exists in this kind of arbitrarily re-put together, slapped together restoration that makes what was already a almost painfully long movie just unbearable. I can't imagine someone today watching A Star Is Born and being moved by it the way those of us who saw it in its original 154-minute version. I
will tell you, I've seen that longer one, and she still pulls it off. It is long, but I think that her power, and of course James Mason. What did somebody said about James Mason, that all his life he looked like he was 45 years old? He was amazing, because he was basically supporting her. At the same time, you watch this man, and his alcoholism absolutely ruined him, and he never ever loses his love for her. Their love was incredible, because they only wanted the best for each other, but he's the tragic character and she has to carry on. And then when Tommy Noonan comes to the house and she's, I can't. He says, you're Mrs. Norman, you have to go. And when she gets up in front of that audience and says, hello, everybody, this is Mrs. Norman Maine. Oh my God, even though it's too long, it is still powerful. And I think that it rests mainly on her shoulders. Yeah. Plus the performances she gave. But I will tell you, her greatest performance as a singer was that scene in that club where she sings The Man That Got Away. Absolutely.
All in one take. It is an amazing performance there. Talking about another musical that has had a lot of controversy around it is My Fair Lady, which won Best Picture in '64, followed by Sound of Music in '65.
Julie Andrews was robbed of the role. Never mind an Oscar. She was, I went to see it, but I had resentment the whole time, because I had listened to my parents saw it with Harrison and Julie Andrews on Broadway, and I saw it in a revival at one point with other people, Edward Mulhare and somebody else, and so I had grown up listening to My Fair Lady with Julie Andrews and how awesome Julie Andrews is, and then they give it to Audrey Hepburn and have Marni Nixon sing it. I watched it with tremendous resentment. How about you?
I think that even though I personally like My Fair Lady, it's very long. It's very ossified. It's very cold, and it's there's nothing about it that you can complain about. But taken as a whole, it doesn't have that great energy that truly strong movies have.
Yes, that scene where she hears him sing "I've Grown Accustomed to His to her face" on the stage is so powerful. And I think that I liked that you used the word cold. Who directed it? I forgot.
George Cukor.
That's interesting. That's it, because you think of warmth when you think of Cukor.
Well,
Or
there was a big feud that was going on at the time between Cukor and Cecil Beaton, and here you had two diva males going at each other. So there's this sense that this battle of wills between the production designer and the director overwhelmed the rather thin story.
Well, you know, something they were also, the thing I liked about Chicago was it had a messy feeling to it, even though it's all obviously very controlled and very thought out, all the dancing, all this, but it had that kind of sense of this is gritty Chicago in the 20s, right? I think that what they did with it, when you showed her in the slum at the beginning, it didn't seem real at all. It just seemed very artificial. And I think that's what you mean by it was ossified. It was art. And I think if it were made today, it would be much more realistic. That's what I'm thinking. It would be a little bit more, it looked like Audrey Hepburn dressed up like a flower girl, right? Instead of, I believe that is Roxy Hart. I believe that whatever, I can't remember the name of Catherine Zeta-Jones's character was, and I believe that's Big Mama. I believe Richard Gere, who surprised the hell out of me in that role. He was amazing.
Well, I saw him on Broadway in Grease.
That's right. He was in Grease. He played Danny Zuko, didn't he?
Yes.
Yo, that's right. That's right. He wasn't one of the originals, but he
was. I think he was one of the replacements.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's the only time he's sung and danced in a film, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
He was wonderful.
That's what he started as. He started as a hoofer. Same with Meryl Streep. Same with Glenn Close. I mean, Glenn Close was in Up with People.
That's right. That's right.
It's interesting to look at that. This year, one of Oscar's biggest controversies is that they say that the Academy Awards is too Caucasian. It's thrown to too many Caucasians. I'm going to take a little bit of an iconoclastic position on this, and I'm going to use my creds as someone who is a different minority to say that the Academy Awards have always been very political in terms of the way they are given. So given the way that Oscars tend to be awarded to whoever throws the biggest campaign, because dangerous ground here, a lot of times the people who have the ballots don't do the voting. They hand it to their assistants, they hand it to their friends,
to their children.
That publicity can make the difference. And sometimes good pictures, good performances fall between the cracks.
Let me give an example. May I interrupt just for a moment?
Yes.
One of the reasons Idris Elba gave an incredible performance in a film called Beasts of No Nation last year. And he should have been nominated, and he wasn't. And one of the reasons is very few people saw it because the marketing and distribution campaigns were not good. They didn't advertise and they didn't push him. And so it wasn't racism that didn't get him on the ballot. It was bad business practices.
That's the trick. And that's what I was leading to. One of the things that I have found very disturbing about Hollywood is that when they do things like Oscars So White, is that it tends to emphasize in front of the camera, or it tends to emphasize above the line, meaning the marquee value, the creative people's jobs. When the actual real challenge to me is the executive ranks. The executive ranks right now are far more narrow than they were 30 years ago.
Well, first of all, besides being pretty Caucasian, and there are more women now in executive positions.
No.
A lot. Well,
where's Sherry Lansing or Diane English?
Yeah.
Or
Stacey, what's her name? Yeah. No, I understand. But what I'm going to say is they're also
Dawn Steele,
former agents. They're no Darryl F. Zanuck. Where are the Darryl F. Zanucks and the men who made the movies, who loved the movies? Now you have agents making deals. You have people who don't have a sense of film history. What was that thing that we said that they showed a script of something to and nobody said Casablanca. They took
Okay.
Casablanca. Is that a true story? I don't want to get off
It's apocryphal, but here's what really happened there. They did not send out the screenplay for Casablanca. They sent out the original play, Everyone Comes to Rick's.
And they said this will not make a movie?
And what happened is that a lot of the development execs at that time said, what are you doing? This is a ripoff of Casablanca with a stupid ending.
Oh, I see. Okay, so that's an apocryphal story to prove how stupid executives are. But getting back to your point, you're saying that your difficulty is within the executive suites. It's kind of narrow to male Caucasians?
Well, let's not even male Caucasians, but when 30 years ago, when I was entering the entertainment industry, or when I had my job as a development exec, where I got the job not because of my race. They weren't saying, oh, we need to hire an Asian. It was an independent production company, but there were about 8 Asians in mid-level to upper-level development jobs who were all coming up with new content and commercial projects. None today. Okay, Kevin Tsujihara running Warner Brothers. He's strategic. He's not creative.
What are these people doing? Did they leave the business? Are they independent producers?
It was 30 years ago. We're all old.
Yeah.
We're too old to do it. But because development really is a young person's game.
Yeah,
it has to be, because you have to know what's coming up next. But there was also Esparza Katz, which was making a lot of movies like Selena and American Me, and there was this whole renaissance of ethnocentric films that were coming out and ethnocentric actors, and we're not seeing that at all right now.
You're seeing it more in independent films, which have always been able to have a broader choice of topics and ethnicities, because people have more personal stories to tell, visions, and they raise money and they make an independent film. And sometimes they break through, they get deals. My thing is about this, the brouhaha about all this is, and I'm going to be controversial. First of all, Blacks are like 13% of the population. And I looked this up. They comprise 10% of the nominations over the years. And I'm just interested in good movies. In the end, I want a good product. I want something that can move me, something I can enjoy. And the last thing I want from all of this, I understand people's concerns, but I do not want an affirmative action Oscars.
No.
If they're going to start nominating films made by Blacks, Black Americans, starring Black actors, because they're Black, because they're scared, they're very liberal, they don't want to be labeled racist, and overlooking good films that are, quote, more Caucasian, I do not want affirmative action Oscars. I want people to earn their nominations for good films. And somebody said that Straight Outta Compton wasn't that good a movie. And now people are going to be afraid to criticize movies that were made by Blacks or star Blacks. That's the thing that really scares me about all this political correctness.
Well, where I come down on that is that with the incredible pushing out of a lot of minority executives, you have a lot of the remaining executives feeling that they need to make meretricious movies rather than good movies. So you will have the quote unquote white executives saying, oh, we need to make another 12 Years a Slave.
Right.
We need to make another Selma. We need to make another Joy Luck Club. We need to make Memoirs of a Geisha.
And what we want to see is another Cleopatra Jones.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. When I was growing up, my poor parents, I would make my dad take me to the Uptown Theater because I loved blaxploitation movies. It started with Blackula, but I made my dad take me to Cleopatra Jones, and this was the big one, was Hell Up in Harlem, and a lot of these, because he would bargain with me. He would take me to one of these films if I would go see a traditional Japanese movie, and I did not want to see something boring like Kwaidan or Rashomon, which was beyond me at that stage. But I understood these other films, and being one of 2 Asians in my junior high school, this is before I went to Tokyo, I identified with them without understanding why. I mean, I loved Uptown Saturday Night. I think that that's what I would like to see. When you have minority-owned companies and you have minority executives, they will look at something like this and go, we want to make movies that are fun. I would much rather see another Godzilla movie. I would much rather see another Chiba Shinichi, which is the political way of saying Sonny Chiba, in another Street Fighter type film, or Jackie Chan in a police story, than to see the Joy Luck Club. Because the Joy Luck Club is one that you feel you have to like.
Well, I have to say, as a woman, I really appreciated and liked the mother-daughter stories. I identified a great deal with them. I have to say, what came to mind was Shaft, and that great music that won an Academy Award.
Isaac Hayes, remember when he came on the stage, dressed in this shirtless with this chains all around him?
It was Richard Roundtree, right? Handsome.
No, that was Isaac Hayes, the composer.
Oh, Isaac Hayes, the composer, yes.
He came and he performed it on the Academy Awards, and it created a spark of controversy.
Right. And also, there's that to see a Black musical, Black singing and dancing, because there are so many talented Black performers out there, and yes, many Black people can dance and dance well. And so I would like to see the whole Black experience. Make your meretricious films, make your historical movies, make your color purples, even though neither one of us liked the movie. Make your honorable Blacks movie, but also make movies that show all aspects of Black life. And let's get back to some Blaxploitation films. Well, they would make a lot of money. I
really was excited when Chow Yun-fat was going to play Charlie Chan. I was very excited when they were talking about doing a relaunching of Mr. Moto. And when I was at the company I was formerly at, people said, what are you talking about? Those are such racist movies. I'm like, they're not racist at all.
And you know what? Where the frontier for more minorities being more evident and present is on television with Dr. Ken, whether they're good shows or not. Blackish, Dr. Ken, Empire, which is Dynasty in the hip hop music with Black and white actors. When you take a look at television, where the writer is king, the showrunner is now king, where there are so many opportunities in different venues, that's where minorities are breaking out, because they have so much. They need original programming, because there are so many outlets now. I think the movies are something else. And I've DVR'd the Oscars, and I'm a little afraid to watch, because I don't want to get annoyed. I don't want to be lectured. I want to be entertained, and I want to see somebody I want to win. I don't want to see I want to see Sylvester Stallone get his Oscar. I want to see the place go nuts when he gets this Oscar, because they went nuts in the movie theater. I know you should have seen Creed by now, but there's a point in Creed where they play the Rocky theme at the right moment, and the audience where I was seeing the movie went crazy, because it's iconic. It's part of our ethos as moviegoers.
Here's an interesting one in terms of Rocky. When Rocky won Best Picture in 77 year, there were a lot of criticisms that this was this showcased how anti-intellectual the Oscars were, because they didn't give it to Network. Now, I love Network. I think it's a masterpiece. I still think Rocky is a much better film. And if you see Rocky today, it is a maturer film, because it's about an underdog who actually lives in a scuzzy looking apartment, who has a relationship with a woman who is not beautiful, and he doesn't win at the end of the movie, but he triumphs. Absolutely. And it's so strong in that. Now I'm going to do something that's rather mean to one of our guys here. I would like to ask Robert, who is one of our producers, who is also a great cinematographer, if he can tell us his opinion of who should be the best cinematographer for this year.
In my opinion, I looked up I just refreshed my memory, some of the nominees. I personally don't enjoy award ceremonies. I love the spectacle, and that's what it is, as a spectacle. And I'm looking up on Twitter right now all the different things, and Leonardo DiCaprio just arrived on the Oscar red carpet, so everyone's freaking out. But as it goes to cinematographer, it just, I don't know. It's hard to pick because it's all opinion based, and it's going for opinions, not for actual merit. I mean, it's not ranked on anything concrete. It's what looked prettiest to you, and that's different to everybody. There's no such thing that as, and at least for Academy Awards. So yeah, so I mean, I mean, if I had to pick just to say who would win, it's probably gonna be Mad Max Fury Road, because everyone's going crazy about how they did the practicals and filmed that. And at the same time, I mean, it was nice, but at the same time, looking at all the rest of the nominees, I can't see any one of them being too crazy.
Okay.
I'd like to just ask one question. Can you quickly answer this? Of all the films you've ever seen, what is the one film that you sticks in your mind as a cinematographer, or maybe inspired you? Or
the one film for me has always been Ocean's 11. Just how you have 11 huge personalities and actors, and you get them all on screen. And then on top of that, you have the lights and the sounds and all the different parts of Vegas and the different places they are, and how most of it was shot during the night. And it's almost like I want to say neo-noir kind of feel to it.
That's an interesting answer. And next time I see it, I'm going to keep, now I'm going to see that next time I see Ocean's 11, because I do watch it periodically. I'm going to see that with fresh eyes. And that's the awesome thing about sharing opinions and takes on things. It opens us all up to looking at things differently. Absolutely.
The bottom line about the Academy Awards, I feel, is that Robert is absolutely right. That it is a spectacle. It is a pageant. It's not really a quantification of art. In 1960, I think it was 60, George C. Scott was nominated for his role in The Hustler, and he refused to even show up. In 1970, when he won Best Actor for Patton, he again refused to show up. He said the Oscars are a big meat parade and have nothing to do with merit. And at the time, my friend Rob and I were in junior high school, and we were discussing Academy Awards. We used to get in trouble from our math teacher because we'd be giving each other Academy Award quizzes instead of studying algebra. And we could not understand how someone who was nominated for such a prestigious award wouldn't show up. Gotta tell you, on the other side of my career, I understand it exactly. That it's such it's for show. It's something where since 1967, it is practically written in people's contracts that they have to show up. You want to know why 1967? Because that year, none of the major players were there. And they realized that causes a problem with the ratings when your highest level person is a supporting performer. Because as much as we enjoy the technical awards, and as important as they are, people watch the Oscars for the stars.
And, on the other side of it, one could argue, yes, that's your opinion, but, showing he was a rebel. He was an alcoholic. He was, he was George C. Scott. And I have a big smile when you mention him in The Hustler, because the thing about George C. Scott, that whenever he's on screen, he's one of those actors you can't take your eyes off of him. He's absolutely incredible, and a very sexy man without being handsome. I mean, he was larger than life. I understand his viewpoint and your viewpoint. I'm a little bit more conservative around all of that. I believe in certain respect for, I'll use the word authority. And I don't believe in that an actor should draw, like what Brando did, draw attention to yourself. And what he did was he tried to make it political. And my thing about, quite frankly, watching the Oscars, I've DVR'd it. I'm very scared it's going to become even more political than it has been in the past. And I think it ought to be off limits. But that's just my opinion.
From a marketing standpoint, which is what the Oscars were always about, it is very dangerous when you have stars get up and make political statements, because you automatically alienate 50% of your audience, no matter what they say. And it's nice for Hollywood to pretend that it's all about New York, San Francisco, and LA. It isn't. It's about the country as a whole. People love movies. They love movie stars. They don't necessarily want to know that movie stars are real people.
Absolutely. And on that note,
we will see you next week.
This is Dan and Saran. We just took on Hollywood. See you then.